The summer of 1987 in New York City was oppressive. A heatwave had settled over Harlem, turning the concrete streets into radiators that didn't cool down even after sunset. For 16-year-old Joy White and 22-year-old Carl Tyson, the heat was the least of their worries. They were new parents, navigating the exhausted bliss of life with their 19-day-old daughter, Carlina. She was a healthy, beautiful baby, the center of their young universe. But on the night of August 4th, the ordinary anxieties of parenthood would spiral into a nightmare that would last for 23 years. It started with a fever. Carlina's temperature spiked to 104 degrees 40 degrees Celsius. Terrified, Joy and Carl rushed her to Harlem Hospital. The emergency room was a chaotic landscape of fluorescent lights and pained voices, typical for a city hospital in the late 80s. Doctors determined that the infant had an infection, likely from swallowing fluid during birth, and needed intravenous antibiotics. She was admitted to the pediatric ward. Joy, a teenager herself, was overwhelmed. She stayed by the crib, her heart racing, until a woman in a white nurse's uniform approached her. The woman was comforting. She didn't look like a threat, she looked like a savior. She spoke softly to Joy, telling her, "Go home, get some rest. I'll watch the baby." She seemed to belong there, blending seamlessly into the hospital's rhythm. Joy and Carl, exhausted and trusting the uniform, eventually left the hospital to get a few hours of sleep, believing their daughter was in safe hands. They didn't know that the woman wasn't a nurse at all. She was a shadow who had been haunting the hospital corridors for weeks, watching, waiting for a child. Between 2:30 a.m. and 3:55 a.m., during the quiet lull of the graveyard shift change, the unthinkable happened. The hospital was sleepy, the nurses' station temporarily distracted. The woman in the white uniform walked into Carlina's room. With steady hands, she disconnected the 4-line from the sleeping infant's arm. There was no alarm. There was no security guard to stop her. She lifted Carlina from the crib, wrapped her in a blanket, and simply walked out of the hospital, disappearing into the humid Harlem night. When the real nurses returned to the room, the crib was empty. The panic was immediate and primal. The hospital went into lockdown, but it was too late. Joy and Carl returned to find police swarming the ward. The devastation was absolute. Detectives discovered that the hospital's video surveillance system had been broken and non-functional at the time of the abduction. There was no footage of the kidnapper. No license plate. Just a description of a heavy-set woman in a white uniform and a vanishing baby. The days turned into weeks, then years. The investigation hit dead end after dead end. A reward of $10,000 yielded no solid leads. The city of New York eventually settled a lawsuit with the parents for the security failure, and a trust fund was established for Carlina in case she ever returned, a hopeful, tragic financial placeholder for a missing life. But as the 1990s rolled on, the headlines faded. Joy and Carl split up, the grief driving a wedge between them, but neither ever stopped looking for the face of their daughter in every child they passed on the street. Meanwhile, 45 miles away in Bridgeport, Connecticut, a little girl named Nejdra Nance was growing up. She was raised by a woman named Ann Pettway. To the outside world, they were a normal mother and daughter. But inside the home, the dynamic was complex. Ann was sometimes loving, but often erratic and troubled. Nejdra grew up sensing a disconnect. She didn't look like Ann. She didn't look like the rest of the Pettway family. Her skin was lighter, her features different. A quiet seed of doubt began to take root in her mind. As Nejdra transitioned into her teenage years, the doubt grew into a suspicion she couldn't silence. She would ask for her birth certificate, but Ann would always have an excuse. "I lost it," or "It's filed away." When the family moved to Atlanta, Georgia, the friction increased. Nejdra was becoming a woman, sharp and observant. She noticed that there were no baby photos of her before the age of 1. No hospital bracelet. No footprints. Just a void where her history should have been. The turning point came in 2005. Nejdra, now 18, became pregnant with her own daughter. To get health insurance and state assistance, she absolutely needed her birth certificate. Cornered, Ann Pettway finally produced the document. Nejdra took it to the Department of Vital Records, hoping to finally close the chapter on her doubts. But the clerk at the counter frowned. "This is a forgery," the official told her. The paper was a fake. The reality of her life shattered in that government office. Nejdra confronted Ann. The argument was explosive. Under pressure, Ann broke down and offered a partial, twisted truth. She admitted that she wasn't Nejdra's biological mother. She claimed that Nejdra had been abandoned by a drug addict and that she, Ann, had saved her. "Your mother left you," Ann said. It was a cruel lie designed to keep Nejdra grateful and silent. But it had the opposite effect. It validated Nejdra's feeling that she was living a stolen life. For the next 5 years, Nejdra lived with this gnawing uncertainty. She loved the woman who raised her, but she needed to know who she was. She was now a mother herself, looking at her own daughter, unable to imagine ever abandoning her. The math didn't add up. In late 2010, late at night, bathed in the glow of a computer screen, Nejdra began a search that would change history. She went to the website of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly. She scrolled through hundreds of photos of missing children. 1987, New York. Infant. And then she froze. On the screen was a baby photo that looked terrifyingly like her own daughter. Next to it was an age progression sketch showing what the baby would look like at 19. The face staring back from the screen wasn't a stranger. It was her. Nejdra's heart hammered against her ribs. The baby's name was Carlina White. She had been taken from Harlem Hospital. The timeline matched perfectly. The description of the kidnapper matched Ann Pettway. Trembling, Nejdra picked up the phone and called the NCMEC hotline. "I think I am that baby," she whispered. It was a call that the operators had waited 23 years to receive. The process moved quickly. The center contacted Joy White and Carl Tyson. DNA kits were dispatched. For Joy, the call was the miracle she had prayed for every single night. For Carl, it was a shock to the system. For Nejdra, in January 2011, Carlina flew to New York. The reunion at LaGuardia Airport was chaotic, emotional, and raw. The moment Joy White saw the young woman walking through the terminal, she let out a scream that echoed with 2 decades of pain and relief. "It's her! It's her!" They collapsed into each other's arms. The media dubbed it the miracle on 135th Street. The baby who had vanished into the night had walked back into the light. But the fairy tale ending had a dark undercurrent. As Carlina reunited with her parents, the FBI began the hunt for Ann Pettway. Realizing the walls were closing in, Pettway went on the run. She was eventually cornered and surrendered to authorities. In the interrogation room, the truth finally spilled out. There was no drug addict mother. Pettway had suffered multiple miscarriages. Desperate for a child to save a failing relationship, she had taken a train to Harlem, put on a nurse's uniform, and taken the baby she felt she deserved. The trial in 2012 was a somber affair. Ann Pettway pleaded guilty to kidnapping. She sat in the courtroom, a broken woman facing the family she had destroyed. Joy and Carl sat in the gallery, listening to the woman who stole 23 years of birthdays, first steps, and memories. Pettway was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. For Carl Tyson, it wasn't enough. "She took 23 years," he said. She should get 23 years. The aftermath of the reunion was not the simple happily ever after the movies portray. The reality of reunification is messy. Carlina had been raised by Ann. She loved, and despite the crime, bonding with Joy and Carl was difficult. They were strangers to her. There were clashes over money, over the trust fund that had been depleted, and over the cultural differences between their lives. The trauma of abduction doesn't end when the child is found, it simply changes shape. Today, the story of Carlina White stands as a testament to human intuition and the bond of blood. It forced hospitals across America to revolutionize their security protocols. Code pink drills and electronic tagging of infants became standard because of cases like hers. Carlina proved that you can steal a child, you can change her name, and you can hide her in plain sight for decades. But you cannot erase the truth written in her DNA and her soul. As snow falls on New York tonight, much like it did in the winters of her childhood, Carlina walks her own path. She is no longer just a victim on a poster or a headline in a newspaper. She is a woman who solved her own mystery, a survivor who refused to accept the lie she was given. In the archives of the missing, her file is stamped "Solved," but the emotional journey of the girl who lived two lives continues.